What if I told you the vast majority of behavior and learning issues can be fixed by resetting or baselining the life of the struggling young person? What if for 90 days they took a break from many of the life-draining activities like not sleeping or eating well and spending way too much time on a screen? What if these lifestyle changes could make a significant impact on our homes and on our schools? Well, baselining works, and Keith McCurdy is back in the second segment of the new Live Sturdy series to tell us how. Join us for this episode.
Mountains, we all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Well, Keith, it's exciting to continue on in the Live Sturdy series as part two. It's excited to have part two.
Yeah, it is. I'm really excited for us to be back. I think it's a great thing.
Well, I've already had some folks email in and say, hey, we're excited about this a series. We're going somewhere, with this kind of structure around it. So yeah, the plan is once a month, we're going to be doing the Live Sturdy series. And we'll just be going through kind of some really top things that you're dealing with and seeing out there. Again, I always say you have such a fantastic vantage point because you are out there in the trenches. Speaking of being out there in the trenches, I want to share, why don't we take a few minutes and share a little bit about what's happening next year for us in 2024. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but I want to just give both parents and school leaders sort of a heads up for what's coming in 2024. And folks, I probably who are listening are like, yeah, Keith was just at our school. You are all over the place. I don't know how you do all you do. How many schools have you been to of late, Keith?
Well, I think once I get finished this week, I'll actually be out west at one more school, and I will have been to 40 schools this year.
Oh my goodness. And you sleep where?
Right. In different hotels.
Yeah. I mean, you make like rock stars seem like they're bored. I mean, that's an amazing amount of schools, 40 schools. And then in just in the last few years, how many do you think you've been to?
It's, I need to add it up, but I think it's probably 120, 140 schools in the last several years. Yeah.
So, and what do you, again, I don't know anyone else. And if somebody else thinks they can beat the Keith McCurdy challenge, please email us and let us know. But I mean, I don't know anybody else that's out there in schools as often as you are, which speaks to the demand and the interest of school leaders. As I'm talking to them, that if you put 10 heads of schools in a room and ask them what kind of keeps you up at night, 9 out of 10 will say, we just want to be more involved in supporting and walking next to parents. Parenting is very difficult these days. Yeah. And how do we do that? I mean, I assume that's part of the reason they're calling you and the frequency that they are.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. If I look over just the last couple of years, I'm hearing the same messages from heads and from parents and seeing it play out when I visit schools. And really, I would throw it in a couple categories that I continue to see is, parents that are expressing, a real desire, a real need to know how to engage this process better with their children. This awareness of we feel kind of overwhelmed and ill-equipped. So how can we better engage this, without all the frills, without all of the gimmicky things, but really, what's the simple truth in how to raise our kids well today? And I think on the other side of the spectrum, it's funny. I've had this question asked me several times in the last couple of years. What's the number one issue with our students today? I'm like, well, there's a lot, but the one that we're fighting with our students so much. And when I share this with students, it's amazing the feedback I get is that we have this myth or lie of the last two generations that are just really overwhelming them, that how they feel is the most important part of who they are. And so we've really given our students a broken compass. We've said your emotional world, your feelings, which really can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. We've told them this is your compass. And then we have parents that are really ill-equipped to know how to really navigate against that lie, in essence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I both share this overarching vision for restoration of the family. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have solid, healthy, Christ-centered families, then it affects immediately our schools. It affects certainly our culture. So you and I are talking a lot right now about how do we respond to this other than go clean ourselves. There's a lot to do. And, this is certainly something I'm passionate about in kind of my own
and you were at a school just
journey
last week. And tell me what you were seeing and hearing.
No, great. Yeah. I mean, had the joy of being at the Stonehaven School there in Marietta, Georgia. And, gosh, I don't know, back 2011, I had a unique opportunity. Most folks probably know the story of getting to do basically a TED Talk. It was Gabe Lyons runs an organization called Q, now called Think. And they asked me to, I remember standing on the stage in Portland with about 800 folks kind of looking at me very suspiciously. This is back in 2011. And this guy was coming to talk about classical Christian education in 18 minutes with a big timer running like a TED Talk. And so I had to really figure out, how do we explain what this unique form of education is that we're all rediscovering? And that has sort of been a niche, I guess you could say, I've been in for a dozen years now. So I was in Atlanta doing a variation on the talk that I often give around what is classical Christian and why is it the right form of education for today. It's amazing, Keith, just how something so simple as what is classical Christian education generally draws kind of perplexed looks even among school leadership. It's on the one hand, there's a lot that's super exciting to talk about in terms of what it is and why it's the right time for it, but it's not often easy to understand it. So I'm going to be continuing to develop that message, and also looking at school culture and just the impact of culture at large on education. So you and I are, the plan is in 2024. I feel like we should run the drum roll thing here. We are really excited about kind of doing a double header. The idea would be coming together on one school at a time and have kind of a 2-day on the ground, get to meet with faculty and administration and students and certainly parents, and cover kind of the broad spectrum from what is classical Christian, why is it the absolute right form of education for today, and then really how do we raise sturdy kids? I mean, those messages are important.
And it's amazing to me. I make this comment often that, I deal with every type of school virtually that there is in the nation and have been for years. And I have yet to find a better model that matches well with what is correct parenting scripturally than that of the Christian classical model. And so I think our blending of kind of those key aspects and those messages can be just so valuable. That's why I'm excited about doing it with you.
I'm excited about it too. We're calling it the Live Sturdy Roadshow. So you're going to be hearing more about that. And we've got a website we're developing just for that. But if you're interested in having Keith and I come to your school, and we would love to do that. We're filling up quick for 2024. So just info@basecamplive.com and let me know you're interested, and we can reach back out to you and have a conversation about that. But we could ramble on about the amazing things that we see the opportunities for doing together, Keith. But folks, click play on this podcast because they want to understand a little bit about this idea of baselining, which sounds like something you would do at base camp. But it's really just a huge need right now in what I like to often call the age of distraction. Everyone seems to have ADD these days. And I know talking to so many, again, just last week in Atlanta, talking to heads of school and teachers who were just saying, the students that show up in my classroom from great families, they're just a little different than they were 4 or 5, certainly 7 or 8, 9 years ago in terms of their attention span and their focus and so on. So help us out with that. How do we baseline?
Yeah, I get referrals in my office for that more than I ever used to. It's amazing the increase over the last 10 years and over the last 30, 40 years from a time when we hardly ever saw this category of diagnosis. And yet today it's around every corner. And so baselining is really the idea of how can we begin to figure out what really is going on with a child who presents often with the parent coming into my office referred by a local pediatrician or doctor that they have gone to because they've been told my child has either this learning issue or attention issue, and so they need to be on medication. And many doctors today are very wise to the fact of, wait a minute, that may not be the first course of operation. And so I get a lot of folks coming into my office saying, I was referred to you to get an evaluation for this. And they say, what do you think? And I say, well, I have no idea. I need to know more about your child. And they say, great. What do you want to know? Let me tell you. I said, no, it's not anything you can tell me. We actually have to baseline your child. And in baselining your child, we will find out a great deal about what they're really struggling with and what really is going on. And that idea, most parents are like, ooh, baselining. All right, that sounds great. And then I begin to explain it to them, and we look at what does it mean to kind of reset the environment in your child's life to figure out what really is going on in their learning environment.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into really what that looks like and specific tangible things one can do in home and to some extent at school as well. And I wonder, Keith, as I think about it, just sort of the spiritual disciplines that are I'm sure there's a huge parallel here that we've lost in the church, the spiritual disciplines, and in our homes. And so I think about something like fasting, which most people kind of look at you with cross eyes if you say fasting. Like, what are you talking about? Like I skip breakfast or something. But
Yeah.
it seems like to me is that maybe a way of looking at what we're talking about. Is just there's a time even biblically to just to deny yourself something in order to kind of really grow spiritually and reset.
Right. Exactly. It's exactly what it is. It's a time to step back from our engagement with life that we go through every day to be able to reflect, to reset, to meditate, to see truth. Because in the midst of everyday life, sometimes we lose that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you don't, I know we're going to get in, take a break here, but
Sure.
the good news is we've not crossed the proverbial Rubicon and we can't go back. I mean, there is a point at which
Absolutely.
I remember, well, I'm glad to hear that because I think I remember years ago, often quote Nicholas Carr. He wrote an article, I think it was July of 2008 in Atlantic Monthly entitled "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And then he went back and wrote a book about it later. And if you think about it, this is a year after the smartphone came out. And I remember Nicholas Carr saying, journalist, I used to read and write long form. I have a hard time doing that as an adult right now. So this was 2008. So again, we're really in a world that is so antithetical to everything that we really need to be about, which is being focused and attending well and engaging.
Well, and
deeply.
especially given that 2008 really was not even the big mushroom cloud of tech and social media. That really didn't begin until 2012 when we had about 50% saturation to where we are now with our teenagers at 97% saturation of social media usage. Worrying about that in 2008 and then really seeing just the collapse from 2012 to 2022 of the mental health world directly linked to this process.
Yeah. And then you had COVID, which told everybody to stay on a screen indefinitely. So it's like, could we stick one more nail in the attention coffin? So, all right, well, let's take a break. We're going to come back and offer some good hope on how to baseline and get ourselves kind of back in the land of healthy habits. We'll be right back with Keith McCurdy. As schools and families, we engage with businesses every day, and unfortunately, many of them are increasingly embracing more progressive ideologies and practices. That's why at Basecamp Live, we're proud to partner with America's Christian Credit Union, a banking institution that only serves and invests in kingdom causes. So whether you're managing a school, a home, a small business, ACCU can meet your banking needs while upholding biblical values. Find out why tens of thousands of families and ministries across the country, including Basecamp Live, have chosen to bank with ACCU by going today to americaschristiancu.com/Basecamp Live. All right, Keith, I'm ready for the answer. I need to know, how do I baseline? What do I need to do? What's first?
All right. Now, baselining, just so you know, is a wonderful thing, even though it's painful. So the very first step in baselining, so I've got parents in my office. I say, all right, here are the steps to baselining. It's 3 months. And they say, great. I say, number one, they have to have regular bedtime that gives them at least 9 hours of sleep every day, including weekends, same time. And the parents say, oh, but they have soccer. I say, not for 3 months. Oh, but they have, dance at 9:00 at night. Not for 3 months. Again, we're dealing with children. We're trying to figure out, are we going to put them on an extremely powerful psychiatric medication, or can they miss soccer or dance or whatever for 3 months? So they're like, oh, okay. All right, we can do this. Great. Same time to go to bed, same time to wake up, 7 days a week. Doesn't matter if it's weekends, no exceptions. We respect
90 days it takes 30 days to form a habit, and 90 days to really reset yourself. Is that kind of the idea?
In my experience with parents and kids, we're dealing, typically the kids that come in this are older grammar school students or younger middle school students. And my experience is 90 days gives us the window to see what we need to see.
And what?
Go ahead.
No, I mean, so with bedtime in particular, what is, what is ideal, and what's probably actually happening out there?
Well, what's usually happening, I assess every patient that comes to my office. I ask them what their habits are. We talk about bedtime. We talk about getting up. And very clearly, the majority of students, even grammar school students, are not asleep before 11 o'clock at night. Yeah. High school students, upper school students are up 1, 2 in the morning on technology, responding to things. The stats we have nationally is that there are, up to a third of our teenagers that are always online. Now, I say this in public to students and they affirm it. Yeah, they're online. Their phone is on. All the notifications are on. If they hear something in the middle of the night, they wake up and respond to it. So we know sleep is drastically disrupted. And so that's why we start right there, because if we don't get sleep in line, if you're not getting at least 9 hours of sleep, same bedtime every night, get your body in a rhythm, then anything else I ask them to do really will not have the effect we need to have.
And so again, just some obvious habits. I say obvious, but the idea of the phone basket in the kitchen or whatever it is.
Oh, no technology in the bedroom. These break into all other categories underneath.
I was going to say everything.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So the first is that. First is bedtime. The second one is based on just the simple reality that the majority of our teenagers, especially, do not eat breakfast. I speak to about 10,000. This year I've spoken to about 10,000 teenagers. And I asked the question, how many of you skip breakfast this morning? It's typically the majority of the room, 75% of the room raise their hand.
Wow.
And so we know if by ninth grade, by 8th grade, 9th grade, the majority are skipping breakfast, that habit got disrupted somewhere along the way. And it's amazing to me how many younger students don't eat breakfast or skimp at breakfast or grab a donut, quality breakfast, as they're running out of the house. And so the second piece is, hey, your child needs 3 to 5 regular meals a day based on their metabolism. And they need to make sure they have breakfast every morning and it's reasonably healthy. And so we have to have a discussion about what that looks like. We have to have a discussion about that means your day has to start earlier. Well, lo and behold, if your child's not going to bed early, they're going to get up earlier. It'll be all right. We've already moved the ball a little bit.
Well, and I'm thinking about the parents that, through the ear of the parent thinking, again, they're not immune from any of this either. They probably have not gone to bed until 11 or 1. And the idea of waking up and finding, more than here's a Pop-Tart, shove it in your backpack and get out the door is probably pretty hard for the parent. So,
well, it's amazing how this reset, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
This reset doesn't just reset the child. It has an effect on the whole family.
It would have to. Yeah.
Because you're changing habits of the family. So the second one is meals. They have to have breakfast. They have to have 3 to 5 regular meals a day. It also helps reclaim the idea of a family table. The idea that mealtime is really about relationship and connection. It's not just nutrition. And families today have lost that quite a bit.
So you're saying, it could be, again, I guess we'll get into the practical side of it because I'm just thinking about, again, wait, I got to get up and make a hot breakfast every morning. What is that going to look like?
Yeah. And those are the challenges parents have to begin facing. What does it really look like? What do I have to change in my life? What different decisions do I have to make to actually attend to the important things?
Yeah.
That I've gotten distracted from or quote, too busy from. So absolutely. Again, a lot of categories that break out underneath this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. So I've gotten some sleep and I ate something other than Pop-Tart. What do I need to do now?
Yeah. Third thing is, put their afternoons after school in routine. And parents say, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, too many times we have routines kind of backwards or we have no routine. Now that you have a captive audience, because they're going to bed at a set time and they're getting sleep. When they come home from school, the first part of the routine is simply have a snack because that's important. The second part of the routine is before you do anything else, and we're not going to chase you around the house and make you do this, but nothing else happens until homework is taken care of. And so instead of trying to control the child, we're now controlling the gate. We're basically saying, if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. You have homework to do first. And until it is finished and taken care of, we don't move on to anything else. Now, this is where, and again, I've got to work with parents over this 3 months on what do we do when the child refuses? What do we do when they throw a tantrum? So many things like that. And we work through that piece, but we're getting in line the idea that you don't move to B till you get through A. The simple reality that responsibility is what leads to freedom and privilege. Too many times in families today, we give the opposite. We think if we give tons of freedom and privilege, then the child will be so thankful and appreciative, they'll be responsible. Well, that doesn't work.
Well, again, and I know you're not suggesting becoming legalistic about it, that there's, it's really continuity, it's consistency in the family. And I think about another day's podcast is just the reality of how much seat time our kids have in our 5-day-a-week schools. And so,
Right.
especially boys that come home and they're about to go out of their mind and they've been sitting in chairs all day, and now all of a sudden, oh, by the way, before you can do anything else, you need to get a snack and go get right to work. I mean, so could they go run around for 30 minutes? I mean, it seems like that might be.
Well, in this 3-month period, I really push away from that, because what happens in today's family is the child comes home, they get loose, and it's 2 hours later, and the parent is trying to drag them back to do homework.
Okay.
And so it's really getting a more of a tight protocol in place for 90 days.
Yep.
Again, we're not looking at what ultimately will be the long-term flow of the family. We're looking to reclaim some ground.
Yeah. Well, I think your point a minute ago, just about this again, it's 90 days, and it's in comparison to you're putting your kid on a powerful
Exactly.
chemical altering drug that you, by the way, had to drive down and meet the doctor and go to the pharmacy and get the thing and adjust the prescription. I mean, none of this is just without effort, but
all of it has effort and sacrifice.
Right.
And then we define what homework being finished look like. Homework finished is it's finished, it's checked, it's corrected, it's back in the book bag. The book bag is by the door or in the minivan, and they've already made their lunch for the next day. So all of a sudden, we've made morning even easier. So now you even have more time to make breakfast and enjoy it in the morning. Once homework is taken care of, now your child has obligations to the family. This is where children start to get onboarded that, wait a minute, I'm not just a consumer here, I'm a contributor. And they don't have to be major long-term obligations that take a lot of time during the week. It could be very simple things. But the idea of every day, you're going to contribute around here in a meaningful way. Once the contribution is taken care of, whatever it may be, now they have freedom and privilege to have fun, to go run around, to do things. The key with that is we really want to encourage a lot of that outside. Then they have a normal bedtime, normal dinner time, normal bedtime. So we put the afternoon in a correct order that is the order of growth. Responsibility is what leads to freedom and privilege. We've laid that out with primary responsibilities, taking care of wrapping up your school day, which includes your homework, taking care of obligations around the home. Then you have freedom and privilege to do other things.
Well, from my experience as a school administrator, the homework, sometimes kids are in this position that would need to be baselined, and probably everybody does. But I mean, if you're having some acute issues, sometimes you struggle to even know or to have written down what your homework is. So again, having kind of an agenda that sets maybe not
this is what we're doing. Right.
And maybe that is the chart on the wall for 90 days, and it's come home and here's the schedule, and write down what are those assignments, and capture it well so that you can actually know when you've accomplished it well.
Yeah. When you set the expectation that this is what we're doing, then what gets built in that is this notion of there has to be preparation for that expectation, both within the parent and within the child. And that's why we want to really get in this system, again, of cause and effect, which is the basic learning tool of childhood. And basically, that's a routine of, we do this before you can move on to this. Most families in today's world are so caught up with trying to chase, controlling behavior, and then meting out punishment that they totally miss that a huge part of discipline and discipleship is guidance, direction. And that's really what the cause and effect routine does. It says, we're going to put this in a proper form of learning. And that, in many cases, avoids the need for chasing the child for the significant amounts of punishment, because we've set the system up to work in a certain way.
Right. Well, we're going to take a break and come back and jump into some more of these. And, as you're talking about this, Keith, I keep thinking about there's so many ripple effect benefits across the family. I mean, when the child gets in order, it would help get adults in order. And I think about, I don't know what the actual statistic is. I think it's like under 1 minute, maybe it's 37 seconds is the actual time the average American family parent spends talking to their child in any kind of conversation, certainly by high school years. And maybe it's just, hey, don't forget your gym bag. But if you created this type of a routine, I just think about all these moments, whether it's over actual breakfast or it's maybe reading again together as a family before bedtime. All of a sudden, you just netted up to 32 minutes a day. Like, wow, what would that be like? So
Right. And those are sub areas that I work on with families during those 90 days of, now that you've set a bedtime, what does a healthy bedtime look like and what does it include? Well, we put in time reading. We put in these processes. If you now have a flow after school of a routine, then maybe one of the obligations of your child every day is they do a little bit to help you prepare dinner, where there's also conversation. I mean, it opens up the avenue
Yep.
for healthier family functioning.
Yeah. Well, final point before we go to break. I remember years ago at Ambrose, someone had kind of done some statistics that it was interesting. The varsity boys basketball players had higher GPAs on average than the other students, and the sort of the probably potentially multiple reasons, but the reason that was fairly clear was that because they had a very tight schedule, they had to go
Right.
straight out of school to get homework done, to get to practice, as opposed to kids that had lots of disposable time that kind of slacked off, and ultimately you were better off because you had full structure throughout the day. So,
Yeah, that's actually, for those who don't know, I also coached 11 years at a classical school basketball, started a couple of programs and coached. That's a national statistic. That's been in place for many years, that athletes that are required to keep a rigorous schedule across the board have higher GPAs than the average student.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
I don't know where that is today, but that was accurate 5 years ago and for many years before that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, kids today can dribble while swiping on their phone, so I don't know if that messes up the whole thing. So don't dribble and swipe. It's not good. All right, we'll be right back and continue this conversation with Keith McCurdy.
Hey there, I'm Jeremy Tate, founder of CLT, or the Classic Learning Test. Here at CLT, we are big fans of the Basecamp Live podcast, and we're honored to work alongside all of you in the classical renewal movement. In addition to our beautiful standardized assessments for grades 3 through 12, CLT also produces a podcast called Anchored that we think Basecamp listeners will enjoy as well. Anchored explores the intersection of education and culture, and it features conversations with leaders across the entire renewal movement, from college presidents and professors to heads of schools and organizational leaders. If you want to stay up to date on all that's been going on in education and in the renewal movement, please check out CLT's Anchored podcast. That's ANCHORED, and visit our website at www.cltexam.com/basecamp.
What if your students could find a college where education is rooted deep in the soil of faith? What if your students could be guided to deeper learning by teachers who weren't just smart, but wise? What if the higher education journey pushed your students to excellence and joy, even amid extraordinary effort? That's what happens every day at Samford University. For 182 years, Samford has equipped our students with the knowledge, skills, relationships, and experiences they need to tackle society's greatest challenges. See the Samford difference. Visit samford.edu/realize. That's samford.edu/realize. Samford, for God, for learning, forever.
All right, Keith, we've got folks going to bed on time, eating better, planning out routines in their day, and getting outside. What else do they need to do in this 90 days? There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to the going outside. One of the things I tell parents is, once you have this routine in place, and then once you set your kids free, once they've taken care of their obligations and their homework, they need at least 30 minutes outside a day. If it rains, buy them a rain jacket. We need children to not be afraid of the weather. It's amazing how we have so bubble wrapped our children today that we have children afraid of environmental conditions. We have children afraid of normal life events. We today have 30% of eligible license holders at 16 that will put off getting a license till they're over 18. We are creating these roadblocks by overprotecting our children and creating too many safe places, too many soft spaces for them. That has backfired majorly. And a great way to experience the normal, broken, dangerous, painful, enjoyable part of life is playing outside. I joke with parents all the time. How does a child learn to check branches when climbing a tree? Well, by first not checking branches. In the physical world of God's creation gives us a sense of sturdiness and durability that we don't get on a screen. So we really need to embrace this idea of we are kicking our kids out of the house. I'll tell a quick story on my mother. And I pray my 88-year-old mother will not listen to this, but it used to be I'm one of 5. And growing up on the weekends, Saturday morning, my mom would fix us breakfast and she would kick us out of the house. And she told us, you're not allowed to come back in the house. And lunch would be ready. She'd bring lunch out to us. We still were not allowed to come back in the house. We were required to be outside all day. If we had to go to the bathroom, it was, it was kind of luck of the draw who got to go in and who had to go in the woods. But we learned to play in the neighborhood. We learned to play with tadpoles. We learned to dig holes. We learned to build forts because there was a requirement that we were going to exist in the physical world. And so many of our children miss that today. And it's amazing what you see when we begin to introduce that back into the lives of our children.
Yeah.
And so that's not a little point. It's a big point.
It's a big point. There's a book on nature deficit disorder, which I think
is
a great topic just to look at. And
Yep.
I grew up in the floodplain near our house we called the Swamp in Atlanta, and there's go-kart trails. And those are some of the best moments in life. And there were things we did that probably would have concerned our mothers involving chainsaws and other things. But yes.
Yeah, we had a pond called Ricky's Pond because the kid named Ricky lived next to it. Wasn't his pond, but it was Ricky's Pond because he lived near it. Yeah, that's right. Well, and then the last category, so I get parents, they hear those four things and they are on board with those four things. And then I say, now the fifth thing is this: no technology, no screens whatsoever, no movie time, no TV for 90 days. This is where the parents go, fall on the floor. And I remind them, I say again, you're trying to figure out whether you put your child on a very powerful psychiatric medication that we don't fully understand what it does with your child. And while some can help, we also have to deal with many side effects. And so I pretty much guilt them into it in a sense. And I just say, I'm just suggesting, take a break from something in your child's life that really didn't exist when you grew up. So it truly can't be true torture. This is a new phenomenon, the way we engage the tech world. So it means they don't look at the weather on your phone. They're not watching TV. They have no technology interface unless it's required medically, checking their sugar levels, insulin levels, or if it's required for a school assignment and then it's on a public computer in a public space. Other than that, no tech, 90 days.
So how does that affect the whole family? Because I can think of a time a number of years ago when I was teaching a middle school discipleship class, and we did a 3-day tech fast and lots of learning even in 3 days. But the biggest problem was the kids all came back in my class and said, Mom and Dad were on, and we go to a restaurant and there was a screen there. I mean, it's you have to almost make it a family-wide commitment, right?
Parents ask me the same question. I say, well, it looks like during the hours of when that child's awake, I said, luckily you gave them a bedtime, but during the time that child's awake, you're fasting as well. It's the only way to pull it off because you definitely don't want to be a hypocrite to your child. And so we walk through it. And what parents grab onto, not always in that first meeting, but definitely by the next week is, well, as one mom said, she walked in my office, she goes, you're actually punishing me, aren't you?
Yes.
I said, well, that meant as punishment. But there's no way to reset your child without resetting part of your life as well.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that maybe half of the parents I give this to, maybe a little more than that, will do it. And not all of them finish it. But it's amazing to me, the ones that do. What we see is, well, it's amazing.
Again, I saw it in 3 days, and that was really painful with students. So, imagining, because you typically see, a client every week, I guess, during this season. So,
during the 90 days, I will see them weekly. I will work with both, sometimes more than once a week, because the parents, depending on how well the parents are taking to this process. So I'm working with the child to deal with it, with the parents to deal with it, how we break all these subcategories out under each one. But what I hear at the end of 90 days across the board, is we have a normal child. Now, again, let's define normal. Normal, unfortunately, in my profession today gets described as this little teeny category where everything else is abnormal. That's where we've gotten to. The real definition of normal is massive. Abnormal is very small. Normal includes awkward, annoying, socially behind, sometimes inattentive, sometimes aggressive and obnoxious. Normal includes the normal human condition within it. And parents come back and they say, well, the vast majority, my child's normal. Doesn't mean everything's fixed, but we realize the issue has nothing to do with attention. Now, that's not all of them. I would argue that's probably 98% of them. The really interesting thing is the other 2% that are left over, the parents come in. Now we have clarity about what issue remains. And then we deal with it and treat it appropriately. But the vast majority come in, they have learned so much more about their child. They have regained healthy family functioning. They have started new traditions in their home. They had to survive it, in a sense. It's amazing how you change the face of the family in 90 days.
So this is amazing. So 98% of these, those who've gone through the 90-day, or 98% have come away with it being really an environmental problem. I mean, it sounds like it's
a developmental issue, right?
Right.
Something
just
that
based on external forces, right? Yep.
Right. Nature versus nurture. Because we are told, unfortunately, that everything is nature. And unfortunately, the expectation then on the parent's view is that only a medication will fix this. The medication in the pharmaceutical industry, especially in the psychiatric industry, not necessarily in every individual psychiatrist, but in the industry, is medication should solve all things in the psychiatric world. Well, statistically, we know that's absolutely not true, so we shouldn't market it that way. And when something comes to us, when someone comes in my office, unless they are suicidal, homicidal, or non-functional, or psychotic, the first response is not what medication to go on. The first response should be, how should I live differently?
But don't you think, again, really it's so much easier to just prescribe medication. You don't have to do that. What you just described is a lot of work, Keith. I mean, starting with bedtimes and diets and yeah.
Yeah, but here's my argument, because I've been in the field now, 35 years. It's easier at the beginning to go down the route of just taking a pill if I think that'll solve something. But the reality is, in the long run, when you get post 90 days, it's much easier to be parenting and raising a normal, functioning, goofy kid than a child for the next 15 years that you're trying to manage and medicate. So it doesn't need it.
Right. So my thought, okay, so I mean, it's quite convincing. I mean, 98%, how do you argue with that? And benefit to family as well. Again, maybe it becomes another podcast, but then what does reentry into the world of distraction look like? I mean, do you have to sort of remain an Amish there a little bit?
That's actually sets the stage for another great discussion with parents, which is parents come in and they say, great, now what do we start opening up and bringing back? And this is when I pause the parents and say, well, first thing I would ask you is this: all those things that you had in your child's life before, did you actually evaluate them before you let them in the first time? And the resounding answer is, well, no.
Right.
Then I say, well, then let's start looking at every single thing you want to let back in, and let's look at the benefit and the cost. Let's look at what we know. If they say, well, my son loves TikTok or Instagram. Well, let's actually look at the current research we have that tells us the problems with it. Let's really say, we're going to look at from now on, we're going to look at the nature of everything we say yes to and no to. And that creates a whole new process for parents. Now they're initiating healthy parenting.
Well, and again, I think it'll be part of future conversations and series, because I know a lot of the concern is coming from teachers who are looking out across their classroom, and it's hard when you're in that position to instigate that, and it's hard when you've got a high school freshman or sophomore that is now coming in and they're having to do this reset when they've had a lot of independence. So one of the things I know you do really well that I'd love to explore further with you is just really helping the student to come to that decision as much as it is the parent. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the topics many schools have me back to do an entire day with all the different populations, all about social media and tech engagement. And It's amazing after this conversation with students, how many students are ready to say, hey, I want to take this challenge. I want to see if this really has an effect on me that the statistics are saying it should have.
Yeah. Well, we need to wrap it up, but one thing you and I keep talking about, and this just makes me want to look into it even more, is, basically creating a vision for living, I guess, a less distracted life, and whether it's making a decision to go with a light phone instead of a smartphone, and kind of getting a little bit of a movement rolling through our house programs in our classical Christian schools, where I know there are high schoolers that are saying, we're tired of it. We're going to do something different, and kind of making that kind of almost like the new rebels, or the
absolutely,
or go Luddites, So,
well, it's amazing to me. I'll end with this.
Yeah.
When I have a student in my office that says to me, I got on social media, I got on Instagram, And in 6 months, I was depressed and suicidal, and I had never been before. And we can look at his feed and see the decline. It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Amazing the effect it can. It doesn't have it on every student, but the stats tell us it has it on more than not.
Wow. Well, Keith, I want to say thank you for that, although I feel like you've both inspired us to do something very difficult, which would be the 90 days. And yet I think there's a way out, which is really hopeful for families and for adults. I think a lot of adults are listening that are probably sensing, I probably need this for myself as much as I need it for my kids. So thank you for that inspiration. And I know folks will love to hear from you. If you go through this process, drop us a line, info@basecamplive.com. We'd love to celebrate with you and hear success stories, because I think there are a lot of folks out there that will benefit from this approach of baselining. So thanks, Keith.
All right. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe on whatever podcast provider that you use, or you can just visit the Basecamp Live website at basecamplive.com. Here you can find the show notes and relevant links from today's episode. One last thing, would you mind going to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and rating and reviewing our podcast? This helps other listeners like you find us. Thanks so much.